Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is George Evenson, and this is Alan Papp. I'm president of Door County Historical Society, and Alan is a consultant with the Papp Consulting Company, and they do work at looking at old houses to see whether or not they have some historical significance, and being able to identify certain periods in time when these houses were built, when they were remodeled and added onto. And what we have here is a Norwegian house built by a man by the name of Hansen. Mr. Hansen came to Door County in about 1856. He came from Norway about 4 years earlier, settled in Chicago, and he was a carpenter and a ship's carpenter. He came to Door County and he purchased this piece of property from a man by the name of Thorsten Hansen, and we're not sure whether that was a brother or not. But he bought the property and proceeded to build a house on it, which was not unusual for the Norwegian immigrants at that time, because they came here eager to own land, eager to find opportunities and jobs, and Mr. Hansen was pretty typical of that kind of person. The only difference is that Mr. Hansen was a skilled carpenter. And when he built his house, he incorporated a lot of the features into that house that were typical of the type of houses that were built in Norway. And since he was a skilled builder as compared to some of the other Norwegian farmers and fishermen and sailors that came here, he had skills that they didn't have. So when he built his house, it turned out to be a little bit different than some of the other Norwegian houses. And that difference is what is interesting to us. This house is a valuable historical asset for Door County because it represents the Norwegian immigrants that came here in the 1860s, and before that stopped during the Civil War and started after the Civil War again. And they made their home here because they were hungry to own land, and the land was available. Now, Mr. Hansen picked this place as an ideal place. There's a flowing creek right next door. It's called Big Creek, and it's a major drainage outlet for this part of the lower end of Door County. In fact, it's one of the few creeks in Door County that empty into the bay. Most of the creeks and streams we have enter into northern Green Bay and into Lake Michigan. So this particular spot of land has a lot of historical significance. And just touch on it briefly, one of the features in this area that was identified in the 1834 mapping of this area was a prehistoric trail that served as a portage for people that were crossing from Lake Michigan onto the waters of what is now Sturgeon Bay. It was quite a shortcut for them to be able to go across the portage before the canal was made, to be able to get into the waters of Green Bay, where the fishing was different, the hunting might have been different, and it was a shortcut for them. And very likely some of the early traders and early explorers also used that trail. That trail in the early maps, the early maps show that trail came right through here, and they crossed the creek from that trail over to the other side of the creek right here, because this is the first narrow place there is in this creek that extends far inland in the Sturgeon Bay area. But we want to show you what is so different about this house. To the ordinary guy driving by, he said, "Look, looks like an old house, old log house," and it's true, it is. But there are some features in this house which are different. And it's our aim, as far as the Door County Historical Society, to redo this house as Mr. Hansen left it in probably 1875, maybe a little earlier, maybe a little later. And that is quite a job, because we're going to have to move back the clock probably 100 years to find the place where we want to begin in the restoration. Now, Ellen here can give you some really interesting details of the house. This house, when you have your experience in Norwegian housing, you look at this house and it'll be like a book. You can read pages of this book as you go through the house, the different phases. It's different, it's unique, and it's a real tribute to old Mr. Hansen, who did most of this work with a handsaw, an axe, and an adze. So I'm going to turn it over to Ellen right now. Ellen can tell you about some of the features of the house from the outside here, and later we'll go inside. So you, okay, Ellen?
Well, I came in as a consultant to help the Door County Historical Society prepare a restoration plan for a potential granting to eventually restore the building for educational purposes. And historical societies are in the business of preserving history. And what we want to do here is do it as accurate a job as possible to portray a point of time. That would be removing a lot of newer material and replacing things that have been torn out, original items, original wall logs that were torn out. Missing doors, missing trim will be replicated and put back in. We'll even be doing a detailed paint analysis to determine what colors the wood products would be painted. But in general, what we have here is a building that has evolved through at least 5 major phases, coming right up to the year 2000. Things were added onto this, modern heating systems and light fixtures. But we want to go back to what I call phase 2. Phase 2 is an interesting phase because it shows the Americanization of the Norwegian. Phase 1 of the building, we find this structure about 1/3 smaller than you see it here, and on a different site. We can tell that it was moved because on the inside there's markings on the wall with a pencil to show that the logs were numbered, and they only do that when they're moving a building, taking it down and moving it and re-erecting it. And that, the original date, as George said, is probably around 1856. The building was 2 rooms for that first phase, and it was only 1 story tall, but there may have been as many as 20 people living in this building. Other families moving into the area would often crowd in, and until they get their buildings built, they often live together. That first phase probably went for about 20 years on its other site, and I determined that at this point by the weathering of the uncovered logs. So approximately 15 to 20 years it was exposed to the sun, and you can see how the ridges in the rings have worn out, and the little fuzz that's come off because of weathering, and the larger chips of wood have fallen away years ago. And then when it was moved to this spot, it had a beautiful new foundation to be put on. It was already constructed and the logs were put on the foundation. It was a modern foundation for Victorian times, and I can see Hansen's wife saying, "I want a nice Wisconsin farmhouse now. We've lived in that old log house long enough." So they gave them a beautiful basement with 1875 vintage windows and plenty of space in the basement for storage of food products. And the second floor was enlarged by an addition on the right here, approximately 8 foot of frame construction was added where you can see the modern entrance door. That's a frame area. But the second floor was then added, which cantilevered over that frame first floor area. And that's a significant design feature found, I don't know if I should say only, but I've never seen any other ethnic group do this. And it produces an unheated enclosed porch area. Now the workmanship between the phase one, the lower floor, and the top floor are very similar, except for one detail. The second floor is not fitted quite as tight as the first floor. And the second floor, being soon to be sided over, it has no what they call chinking between the logs, but there would have been rags put between the logs. That's called a scribe fit method. And the bottom first floor is a much tighter scribing than the second floor. It appears the workmanship was done by the same man, and it was done using a broad axe. The corner notches are dovetails. The bottom half, the first floor, is cut off on the ends with an axe, cross grain, where the dovetails on the second floor were cut off with a saw. And if you've ever tried to cut a cross grain and make it nice and flat, you'll know the skill of this man and the sharpness of his axe when you look at the close-up. Originally, phase one, the building probably faced south the way it is now, because we've noticed that there are no window openings originally on the north side. Now, a person would want to gain the southern exposure of the sun. These, a set of 3 windows together are, it comes in, the phase 4, 1950 to about 1970. These are fairly modern windows, and all the original windows were replaced in this building over time. And much of the original phase 2 siding was replaced now and then as changes were made. The gable that faces the south here is not original to phase 2, but we can see the rafter tails were cut off that originally had the eave supporting. They cut them off and built the gable dormer. And even that went through several phases. Originally it had a taller window in the gable dormer, and now it has a more modern, smaller window. When the Historical Society acquired this building, it was covered with clapboard siding, and over a period of time, work crews came in here to open it up to see what they have. So it's likely that we'll be putting siding back over this after the logs have been repaired and restored, and some kind of a preservative added onto it. There's 4 different types of logs used in this wall. And you can probably see one very light horizontal log in the wall. I'll point it out here. This is a log made out of ash, native grown ash. The log above it is white cedar. The base log is red pine, which was added for phase 2 when they put it on the foundation. The original base log is out of basswood, and is full of powder post beetle holes. Powder post beetles love basswood. Basswood's easy to carve, but it's also is not very prone for keeping insects and rot away. And the rest of the logs are made out of red pine. So I think we can work our way around the side of the building and then go on inside to look at some of the details. This is the southwest corner of the Hansen House, and it's interesting to see the full dovetail corner notch design used here. That means every angle, every surface like this is at an angle. They're not exactly the same angle at each one, but they're quite similar. The ends of these logs were cut off with an axe, cross grain. Right there is a carpenter ant looking for a good lunch. We'll take care of him. Notice over here a scribe fit. Now you can't even stick a knife blade in there. That is so tight. And in Europe, especially north of the Arctic Circle, the coldest parts of Europe, this scribe fit method was developed. And it doesn't require any mortar or mud chinking or daubing to seal it up. But what they put inside of this joint is sphagnum moss. Sometimes they use rags, but most of the time it's sphagnum moss for insulation. And the bottom of each log is scooped out to fit on the top of the log below it. They don't want to cut anything off the crown of the log because that's the most rot resistant part of the log. They only cut on the underside of each log, not on the top of the log. And it's used, a scriber looks something like a dividers, like my fingers, where they do this in two operations to get it nice and tight. Rough scribing to get it within 2 inches of the two logs, and then final scribing. And basically one part of the scribe rests on the log below it and goes up and down on the log below it and leaves a mark on the log on top, and that's what the axe person uses as a guide. And when they put it in here and they drop it into place and it goes nice and thunk, they know that there's an even touching all the way along there. If they don't hear that thunk, they know that somewhere it's being held up, and they'll take it off and they'll fine tune it again, but it's got to get a nice solid thunk to drop into place. All the Scandinavian groups, except the Danes didn't seem to go for log buildings. So the Swedes, the Norwegians, and their neighbors, the Finns, built these kind of handsome. In the old country, it was expected that every male could produce a structure that looked like this. This was sort of a symbol of growing up, that you could provide a beautiful, strong building for your family and your cattle. This log here is 16 inches high, red pine. There's a little bit of moss stuck in the holes. When they moved the building and put it on this new foundation, they put a whole new, 2 new base logs in here. You can see this one over here is a squared timber. It's not even hewn or anything. And the base timber here is nearly 10 inches wide. That was hewn out, but this one here came from a sawmill somewhere, and it was squared. So all they had to do this is the original base log, is to square it up a little bit more to fit onto the top of this squared timber. You see some deterioration here, and we'll be treating this with epoxy consolidation. We'll basically turn the original wood into a solid piece of plastic, and it will not deteriorate any further than that. Well, George, here's the old front door entrance.
Yep. Yeah, here's the old front door entrance.
We can see that at one time this doorway assembly was a lot taller and probably had a transom light cut into that
Yeah.
that's overhanging log there.
Yep.
So this is the
Well-
what they call the sval, S-V-A-L, the
Come
porch.
on in, laddie. Well, Ellen, why don't you take us around the inside and show us some of the details that make this place really different?
Okay, first of all, just for the fun of it, I'd like to point out this would be phase 5, electricity added to the building, but look at how clever the electrician was to hide the cable and the box. I found that electricians are some of the most clever contractors to have on a job like this. Of course, we're going to have to fill that in and cover that over and make things like that disappear. One of the truly Norwegian ideas brought to America was how to create these window and door openings in a log building. And for centuries, they devised what I call a keyway. It's approximately a 2x2 vertical piece of wood that's put into a channel in all the logs and then into a hole here. And as the log wall shrinks and settles, the door is held nice and plumb because it's nailed to this keyway and not to the logs. So the logs coming down don't ruin the trim or they're being held up from shrinking. So this kind of design is indicative of the Scandinavian style log buildings. Another real obvious thing besides the wonderful hewing and fitting is the second floor would have had gables of logs, and this wall would have had an interior wall of logs going to the peak and down, and then large purlins spaced about every 2 feet would be set on the outer 2 gable walls and the interior gable, and that would support the roof. In Norway, they would have had sod on. This is a very strong roof system. But when the phase 2, when it was moved here and the second floor was put up, they discarded those gable end logs and put up a regular 2x4 type rafter roof system. So what we see here is a whole bunch of American ideas creeping in on the Norwegian builder, and of course self-directed. I can imagine Mrs. Hansen saying, it's so dark in here, let's brighten it up and whitewash the walls with calcimine. So we find here many layers of calcimine placed right on the wall logs. It also provides evidence that there, like right in here, was a partition attached to the wall. They whitewashed up to here, but not in this area. And then at a later time, somebody moved the wall over to this point, and that got a thicker coating of whitewash. Here you can see the window trim of the original window. This is a modern window, and this is a window strap to hold the modern window jamb in place. But we look at all of these different clues and try to group them into various phases. Everything in a building like this has a story, and we look at every square inch to examine its evolution. For instance, the ceiling in this main room was made out of wider boards, square-edged, that were hand-planed. You can see the hand plane marks. and then covered with about 5 layers of paint. Right in the middle, somebody would be looking at these ceiling joists and say, well, what is this little knob thing here for? And why is that cut out like that? Well, lo and behold, this span is not strong enough to really support the upstairs activity, especially these joists are on 3.5 foot spacing. So Mr. Hansen, this is the end of a 3/4 inch vertical iron rod that goes all the way up to a big beam in the attic, and it helps hold the ceiling here stronger. Here is the electrician was so clever, he countersunked his circular box right into our historic ceiling joist. These joists have a chamfered edge. The original builder hand planed an angle on each of these corners. In the other room, he put a bead on each of the corners, so they're a little bit different handling. Anyway, we're trying to unravel all of these various evolutionary details so that we can arrive at an exact point in time, tell what was whitewashed, what was painted, what kind of floor should we use. They've used 3 different types of flooring here, and we want to get back to the original one. This is kind of cute. If you want to take a look at this floor, hardwood is expensive. So they were apparently running short on the oak hardwood, and they filled in this rectangle here with cheaper tongue and groove fir. That's the kind of material you would have used on an outside porch in those days. The oak here is from about 1950. Below this is hardwood tongue and groove maple from about 1880. Below that is the original flooring, which we want to expose, and that is 6-inch wide square-edged pine. So we have to figure out what kind of baseboard goes in here, because that's been torn out years ago. And the doors are missing, the original doors. So we'll have to look at other Norwegian houses to determine what the design of the doors should be. Here's the original stovepipe hole right in the ceiling. We're standing in what would have been the kitchen, and the kitchen stove would have had a 6-inch stovepipe going straight up through this hole. The hole is 9 inches, and what it would have gone up, about 6 feet on the second floor, turn and go into a brick chimney. And in the other room, they would have had a parlor stove with the same arrangement, a stovepipe going up through the floor and into that same chimney. Then they moved the chimney to the east side of the house, chiseled out some part of the front of our logs, and put the chimney from the base right up through the roof. And then in about 1930, they put an external chimney, and they cut a hole in the wall here and put this with brick. And so we have at least an evolution of 3 different chimney locations. And of course, we're not going to be using this one. The existing chimney out there, we're going to knock down and get rid of. Here is some rags used for keep the air from coming in. And then mortar chinking was put over the rags. But for phase 1, when it was on its original site, they didn't use any mortar or any rags, just sphagnum moss. Look at how tight that joint is there. I mean, that's unbelievable. You can't get a fit like that. with logs in today's market. This was a kitchen area for during phase 4, and phase 5 they converted into a dining room and added a kitchen wing on the outside of the building, cut the logs out of this wall. There used to be a window over there, but we're going to have to splice in all new logs to bring it back to where we want it. And when it made it into a dining room, they put the hardwood floor down and put a brand new staircase here, cutting the ceiling floor open. Before they did that, this room was lath and plastered on top of the whitewashed logs. See, here's some of the lathing that the crew still has to remove. So this whole staircase will not be reused. Let's go upstairs and see a few interesting things. Basically, the upstairs was, for phase 2, was just 3 rooms, interconnected rooms. And then for phase 4 and 5, they put in a number of partitions, doorways, closets, and drawers. But most of these things you see up here will be taken out. Here's that dormer window that we saw from the outside. The sides are squared out, so behind this wall is a secret hiding place, underneath the roof. We can take that out. The east side of the house is over here, and originally, for phase 2, we would have had the main staircase coming up through this area, and there wouldn't have been any flooring here at all. And when they would come up the stairs, they would step on wide boards, which are underneath. These are modern boards. They would turn, and there would have been a doorway opening right here. And evidence, then it was all plastered out, and then later on they took this part of the wall out, and we can see how where it used to attach, they had to patch that up. So we're reading the evolution of the second floor. The rafters are above here, they're simple 2x4s, and the roof sheathing boards are really thick. They're about a 1 1/4 inch thick roof boards. This upstairs has gone through a lot of changes, and the plans are now to just kind of gut it out and leave it for phase 2. Simple 3 rooms. And this one with no flooring in this area. We'll have to come up with a design for a handrail right here, so that people will come up here, won't fall down the opening. I'd like to point out our best door in the whole house is this one right here. This is the way a Norwegian makes a door in a simple log house. There's 2 boards, one wider than the other. They're hand planed, and they're held together with what they call a cleat. And the cleat has chamfered edges or tapered edges, and then nailed with cut nails. So this door is probably from the original 1856, recycled to the second floor. There's 3 different designs similar to this up here, but this is the oldest one and the nicest of the handmade original doors. The flooring again is phase 4 maple hardwood, right around well, anywhere between 1910 or 1920, this was available. This is kind of interesting. Everyone knows about linoleum, but one of these buildings I worked on, I found $2,500 in envelopes stuck under linoleum like this. And it's a nice place to hide stuff. Nothing hiding under there, but there's a penny. Modern flooring. Yeah, Ole, this was a nice log house when it was built. You got to be proud of your workmanship, Ole. Here's a crude little sketch of what the Hansen House would have looked like for Phase 1 when it was on a different location. Gable end doorway and 2 rooms divided by an interior log wall. The logs going all the way up to the peak and then held together by purlins. And I'm not absolutely positive if it had log gable ends, but we'll be able to pull up some flooring upstairs, and I'm looking for vertical peg holes in the existing log, and that, if they are there, that will tell us for sure that it had this kind of a gable, because the whole gable is held up by vertical wooden pegs between the courses of the logs. Now the human mind, they say, can only hold about 7 variables at once before it turns to mud. So we take a lot of notes, and we're constantly trying to peg the building to various phases. For instance, down here, here's this window, which is nice and symmetrical with this one on the east side of the house. But on the inside, which we'll look at in a second or two, the stairs originally went across this part of the wall. Well, how many houses have you been in where the staircase goes right across a window? So you start looking a little closer, and you notice that the whitewashing goes right out to the cut of the boards, which means that there's no spot there for a window trim, which means that the window was cut in after the building was built. Here's the dimensions for the staircase, which is entirely missing. There's just a ghost pattern, we'll see that in a minute, where the whitewashing stopped and started. Floor plan measurements of the second floor, bathtub, everything. This will be drawn to the quarter scale. 1 inch equals 4 feet. And various notes on the gable end, flooring notes. Here we are in the Sval room, which was the framed first floor porch enclosure. And this is how the Norwegians like to get to the second floor in these kind of houses. This is an unheated area, and you would come out of the heated portion of the house here into the stairwell, go upstairs, and then back into the heated area. How many of you would put up with that, going outside to get to your bedroom? But this was an age-old custom. Here we have the ghost pattern of the original staircase for Phase 2. And we know that that was an 1.5 inch overhang with a piece of cove molding below the tread. So we'll have an accurate pattern of how to construct this, and the width is determined by a notch up here that shows where the outside stringer was located. And the third thing is the whitewashing goes right to the edge of the board, and if there would have been a window here, we would have had window trim, and that would have, we would have had an area of unpainted wood. But seeing the whitewash goes right to the end, you know that this was sawed out and this window added. We also look around what's whitewashed, what isn't, and determine there's only one ceiling joist here. So all the rest of this would have been open next to the staircase. So we have a frame building here, 3 sides, and the rest of the building is log. Very interesting. Well, George, you got a really gem of a building here. It sure has been fun doing the history detective part.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's been enjoyable watching you work. You are a detective of the first order, and you look for details that other people would just simply walk over. But it's really great to have this opportunity to show the Hansen House to the people of Sturgeon Bay and Door County, and any of the others who would want to look at it. We're really proud of this effort. We think that it's a real tribute to our Norwegian heritage. It's a real tribute to the conservation mindedness of folks that look at something like this and say, this is something we want to save. This is something that's going to be valuable in our future. It's going to be more valuable as time goes on. Because the memories of these people, they fade like old photographs. They fade like memories, and soon they're gone. But we want this to be a living memory for generations to come and see what has been really, what are the foundations of America really were all about. And so we want to thank you. We hope you'll become interested in our project, because we're going to do a first-class job of making this as close as possible to what old Hansen had when he built it. So thank you very much. And I guess let's take off. So we'll see you later.